Hi everyone, this is Feng Ho Yin from the Hong Kong Open Print Shop. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Paper Conversation Series. Beyond Paper is a project presented by the Hong Kong Open Print Shop. It explores the application of printmaking techniques in art by showcasing brilliant works and ideas from international printmaking masters. The Hong Kong Open Print Shop has designed a series of fruitful programs for Beyond Paper, such as conversation series, workshops, demonstrations, and exhibitions. So without further ado, may I introduce our featuring printmaker today, Yoonmi Nam. Yoonmi, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about my works. My name is Yoonmi Nam, and I teach in the Department of Visual Art at the University of Kansas in the United States. As an artist, my background is in printmaking, drawing, and painting, and I also make sculptural works using clay, glass, wax, and other materials. I would like to begin by talking about my print series titled Arranged Flowers, and another set of prints titled The Four Seasons. These are both inspired by images of traditional East Asian woodblock printed books. In particular, I was inspired by two 17th century woodblock printed books from China called The Mustard Seed Garden Manual of Painting and 10 Bamboo Studio. I would also like to talk about my recent exploration into sculptural works that investigate the idea of the daily, time, translation, identity, and history. I make lithographs and mokuhanga prints in my work. Mokuhanga is a term used to describe contemporary print works using Japanese-style water-based woodblock printing method. The first time I became aware of the traditional East Asian water-based woodblock printing was in graduate school when I was studying painting and printmaking at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island. This, however, was probably not the first time I encountered a water-based woodblock print. I grew up in Korea and received my BFA in printmaking from Hongik University in Seoul, South Korea. As a printmaking student in Korea, I studied all kinds of printmaking processes, such as relief, intaglio, lithography, screen printing, etc. However, my printmaking technical knowledge was focused on Western-style printmaking, which is primarily oil-based printing. I was aware of the long tradition of woodblock printing in Asia, but I hadn't paid much attention to realize the difference between water-based and oil-based woodblock printing. When I was a graduate student at RISD, a printmaking professor of mine introduced me to the Mustard Seed Garden Manual of Painting and 10 Bamboo Studio. These are woodblock printed books that were first published in 17th century China. Soon after these books were published, they were widely distributed to other parts of Asia and were influential in the training of artists not only in China, but also in Korea and Japan. The images in these books consist of landscapes and various compositional arrangements of different subject matters using sumi ink and brush painting methods. These books also include thumbnail images of different examples on how to paint certain subject matter, such as all the different ways in which an artist can use brush strokes to depict various kinds of leaves on trees. They also presented the order and method in which one can paint orchids or bamboo using a specified sequence of brush strokes. An artist in training could examine these different ways of using brushstrokes and study them by copying them and creating their own imagery. Over time, these books were reprinted or reproduced and translated into different languages, influencing cultures in other parts of the world. I recall going to a museum with an appointment to see this Mustard Seed Garden Manual of Painting book with my professor. We looked through the traditional stab-bound, woodblock printed pages, and I finally saw the details of the carving and the water-based pigment printed surfaces that are clearly different from the Western oil-based woodblock prints. The introduction of these old woodblock printed books and the experience of viewing them closely launched a curiosity in me that began my journey in Mokuhanga. My first Mokuhanga artist residency was at Nagasawa Art Park in Japan in 2004, where I learned the traditional carving and printing techniques from master craftspeople. I returned to the residency 2 more times in 2012, and then again in 2019, now called Mokuhanga Innovation Laboratory, also known as MILAB, which had relocated to Kawaguchiko. For me, learning these techniques was an eye-opening experience and allowed me to understand why I hadn't noticed the traditional Asian woodblock prints that were all around me while living in Korea. The reason was that these water-based woodblock prints lacked a certain printed look of a typical Western oil-based prints that I was more familiar with, such as this oil-based woodcut print by German artist Kathy Kollwitz. These Western-style oil-based woodblock prints had expressive and textured surfaces, resulting from the use of carving tools, such as the U-gouge and V-gouge, and these carved marks were left visible in the impression. However, traditional Asian woodblock carving was primarily done using a knife, also called hangito, to accurately carve out lines to imitate the brushstrokes of a painter, rather than allowing the mark of the carving tool to be visible. The pigment used to print was also water-based, creating a subtle and translucent watercolor-like impression on paper. As a printmaker and a Korean artist living in the US, my inquiry into these 2 books and the technique of water-based woodblock printing became an inspiration and the starting point for several bodies of works. I find these books to be interesting examples of a cross-cultural dialogue that occurs over a long period of time through printed media. Also of interest to me as a painter and a printmaker is the conversation and the translation that happens between painted imagery and printed imagery, as well as between the different printing processes. Personally, I find a parallel in the way I find myself as a person and an artist that lives both comfortably and uncomfortably in 2 different cultures. While they are all same books, both their words and images are translated, and the pages are bound in the way that makes sense for the place and the time period that it is presented in. I find these books to be both familiar and foreign, and I'm intrigued by the possibility of misinterpretation, exaggeration, enhancement, deterioration, and the experience of simply encountering these images out of context. These are the sentiments that also inspire me to make my own works. In my works, I'm interested in beauty, irony, inevitability, and the common and extraordinary way we structure our everyday surroundings. I find beauty in the man-made spaces and objects, both handmade and commercially mass-produced, that we surround ourselves with. I'm intrigued when these spaces and objects feels both familiar and foreign, and also when they subtly suggest a contradicting sense of time that seems both fleeting and eternal. In the Arranged Flower series, I make prints using images of cut flower arrangements. The flowers, once cut from their roots, have only a short remaining time to live, and they will quickly wither and die. But before they do, they're elegantly and elaborately arranged, as if time will stand still for them. I'm interested in this idea of cutting flowers and artificially organizing them to create the illusion of a natural environment, and in doing so, provoke a certain visual, intellectual, or emotional impression or message. When I became interested in cut flower arrangements as a subject matter, I also began researching old woodblock printed books that depict images of flowers, such as traditional ikebana arrangement instruction books, and began making drawing studies using sumi ink and brush. Ikebana is the art of flower arrangement in Japan. This led to making a series of mukuhanga and lithographic prints, where I reference flower images from these traditional black and white woodblock printed books. In my prints, I decided to replace the traditional vases with disposable containers and explore how these unexpected combination of subject matters and the method of depiction can speak about my interest in time and place. These containers that hold the flower arrangements are mass-produced disposable objects, such as yogurt cups, a styrofoam takeout box, and an instant noodle bowl. They are all objects that we casually encounter on a daily basis. For a brief moment of time, they fulfill our temporary needs and desires. They are unique, yet also universal, and they are both insignificant and special. Conceptually, these throwaway objects and cut flowers engage in a dialogue that also speaks about impermanence and persistence. Visually, my flowers are generally flat and monochromatic, but the containers are colorful and dimensional. My intention is to try to create a sense of displacement between the two elements, as if they don't quite seem like they exist in the same time and space. The flower images in my prints reference the woodblock printed flower images from the traditional Asian books. Here, the sense of space is quite different from the Western way of depicting objects in space, which is with full dimensionality and value to create an illusion of volume. The monochromatic botanical arrangements that are depicted using brushstrokes are precariously placed inside colorful and three-dimensionally represented disposable containers. I hope that these moments where the flower stem meets the container creates interesting tension in the work, not only because they're unrealistically and precariously placed in these paper cups, but also because of the way in which they were visually presented. Before I move on to the next body of works, I just wanted to show you a recent iteration of this series that took on the form of a large billboard in Kansas City in the US. It is installed on the side of the gallery called the H&R Block Art Space. This set of 4 prints titled The 4 Seasons is also inspired by the images of the traditional woodblock printed books. I was also exploring the structure of these traditional Asian stab-bound books and the idea of taking things out of context through unbinding the books in my prints. As a result, the images appear to be cut off and incomplete until you see the other half of the image on the print next to it to complete the image. These small still life vignettes highlight everyday events, spaces, and objects that, while insignificant and mundane, allow us to notice both the stillness and the passage of time. These everyday objects are composed into imagined pairings and fictional arrangements inspired by the 17th century Chinese woodblock printed book, Ten Bamboo Studio, the traditional Japanese woodblock printed illustrations of ikebana flower arrangements, and also chekkori paintings that depict, quote, books and things, unquote, from the Joseon period in Korea. Formally, I am directly referencing my experiences and encounters with the traditional woodblock printed books from East Asia in the way that I present the 4 prints. Arranged in one long line and reading from right to left, I created 4 simple still life images that depict items that represent the 4 seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. All of these still life setups are cut in half, revealing the binding structure of a traditional Asian stab binding technique. In my prints, they are presented as if the pages have been taken apart, thus splitting the still life images into separate pages. When you start from the right, you see an instant cup noodle and a pair of chopsticks. This still life image gets completed when you connect the other half, which is located on the very left of the 4-print lineup, where there is an image of a book. This stab-bound book alludes to the structure of this set of prints, and together with the cup noodle, suggests that perhaps someone is enjoying their midnight snack while reading a good book on a cold night. Moving to the left, you see a postcard with a reproduction of Hokusai's ukiyo-e print depicting Mount Fuji, reflecting on Lake Kawaguchi. You notice that the image reflecting on the water shows snow-capped Mount Fuji in the wintertime, but the actual landscape shows springtime. I wanted to show the transition of season using this Hokusai's print image, as well as paying homage to the technique of water-based woodblock printing that was used in ukiyo-e prints. Lake Kawaguchi is also a meaningful location for me personally, because that is where I go to for the artist residency, and this print was started during my 2019 residency there. Hovering above the postcard is a branch with a couple of camellia flowers that is set in a Japanese milk carton. Oil made from camellia flower is also used in the mokuhanga process. Continuing left, you see a fan with an image of bamboo on it. This bamboo image is directly from the Mustard Seed Garden manual of painting, and both the fan and the bamboo symbolize summer. Finally, an image of a ripe persimmon taken from the 10 Bamboo Studio sits next to a single serving size natto cup with another botanical arrangement taken from an Ikebana instruction book. This represents autumn, and then you see the image of the book, showing us that we have made a full circle back to winter. I'm interested in exploring moments where a sense of time feels both fleeting and still. In this series of work collectively titled Momentarily, I explore time through still life and materiality. Observing the top of my kitchen table, as items are temporarily set and then quickly discarded, I consider the sense of time that seems both temporary and lasting. I began drawing the Daily Mail and the junk mail that often gets casually tossed on my kitchen table and eventually discarded. For a couple of months, every day, I would bring in the Daily Mail from my mailbox and toss them on my kitchen table. At some point in the day, I would do a drawing of them, and then I open the mails, and then they get discarded. Selections from these drawings were scanned and made into a tabloid-sized newspapers, returning these back into junk mail. This is part of an installation view from a solo show I had in 2016. On the left is a handcrafted wooden table made to imitate a cheap card table, and on the top of the table are styrofoam cups made out of cast plaster. On the right is a stack of newspapers, and in it are reproductions of my daily junk mail drawings. The visitors could take them away during the exhibition, and perhaps they would also toss it on their kitchen table, and it will become part of their brief still life arrangement. I was observing this ever-present, yet always changing still life of a sort that occurs on my kitchen table. These daily and mundane setups are brief and temporary. The top of the table becomes a site for staging takeout dinners, grocery bags, and the Daily Mail. Things are handled, consumed, read, worked on, and when these activities come to a brief pause, they become a composition in an unintentional still life arrangement. And then, unceremoniously, these objects exit the stage and get discarded. This series depicts takeout meals as a sculptural still life. The intended lifespan of these disposable objects are short, typically meant to be used only once. But as materials, they often last longer than their intended lifespan. Here, I transform their physical presence by recontextualizing these objects through new materials and new contexts. For example, in this piece, I meticulously recreated a plastic deli container that is inside a plastic bag with a generic thank you message printed on it. The plastic deli containers are recreated with cast glass. I'll talk a little bit about the process because the choice of the materials and the processes are an important part of my work. For this particular piece, the process began with making the plaster mold from an actual plastic container, as you can see here on the left. From the plaster mold, I pulled multiple wax forms. Then you add air passageways and funnel-shaped form, which is where the molten glass will be poured into. With these wax forms, investment molds are made by mixing plaster and fiberglass. So now the wax forms are upside down and inside this plaster and fiberglass molds on the right. The darker part in the middle is the bottom side of the funnel form. I don't have the photograph to show you, but the next step is to steam out the wax form so it melts out, leaving hollowed out plaster molds at the end. After these hollowed out investment molds are adequately heated in the glass kiln, molten glass is poured into the opening. The glass forms are out of the kiln after a couple of days of annealing, which is the process of gradually lowering the temperature over a period of time. The funnel parts are cut off, and then it is cold work to reveal more polished and clear glass surface. The plastic bags are hand-printed lithographs on gampi paper that are then cut and constructed into a bag form. This is an example of a hand-drawn film on the left, which is used to expose onto a photolitho plate. For this particular bag, I collaborated with the printmaking graduate students at Northern Illinois University when I was a visiting artist there. The gampi paper is a traditional Japanese paper that is very delicate and tissue-like, but the surface somewhat resembles the sheen of the plastic bag. Here, the students and I are cutting, folding, gluing, and assembling the bags. On the right, we have 2 stacks of paper plastic bags that are completed. And here's how that bag is used with the styrofoam takeout container inside, which is actually made of slip-cast porcelain. And this is one of the pieces from the cast glass process that I showed you earlier. While these are a faithful and earnest recreation of reality, the slight shift in their context and materials brings about a shift in the sense of time, place, and purpose. The next couple of slides show how some of these pieces were installed in my solo exhibition in 2019. The ceramic pieces are arranged on custom-made tables that act as pedestals to suggest kitchen table still life arrangements. I also created several vases in the form of takeout containers, and during the exhibition, I made fresh cut flower arrangements every week, inspired by my prints and also by traditional ikebana arrangements. These flowers marked actual passages of time as they would slowly wither and die, and then they would get replaced. Finally, I want to show you some process images and works that I've been working on lately. I began making this body of work in my studio during the lockdown in 2020, when I didn't have access to the printmaking shop and the ceramic studio. I was spending my days mostly alone in my studio in Kansas City while teaching classes over Zoom. This work explores the notion of time and everyday rituals through material exploration and the act of translation. Like many people during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, my husband and I stayed in our small house and relied on deliveries to sustain us. Every week, delivery boxes and plastic containers of varying sizes and shapes from local restaurants, shops, and online stores were left at our front door. I developed a routine of disinfecting them, unpacking them, and then breaking down the boxes and other packaging materials to recycle them. It became a consuming part of my daily activity because if they were neglected, the boxes and plastic containers will start taking over the small space that we lived in. In the process of handling these objects for recycling, I noticed interesting shapes and began to collect them. My studio practice often begins with noticing something and then starting a collection of the thing that I notice. In this body of work, my collection of flattened out boxes became templates that I used to trace their outline shapes onto Tyvek sheets. I first painted both sides of the Tyvek sheets with Yoonmi ink, and then sprayed them with the alcohol-based sanitizers that I had used to disinfect the surfaces of our deliveries. When the mists of this alcohol spray land on the Yoonmi ink surfaces, it reacts with the still wet ink and makes visible the trace of my disinfecting action. Using the various box templates, I traced their shapes and made the necessary cuts and folds to imitate the original boxes. Using these ink and alcohol-stained cutout shapes, I made studies of different arrangements and conditions. At times, the box shape remained tethered to the rest of the Tyvek sheet, and at other times, different shapes of flattened out boxes were stacked in a small pile, as if they were to be taken out to be discarded. The resulting body of works are collectively titled Delivered and Discarded. And here are some detailed shots of that piece. This body of work was recently exhibited as a solo exhibition in Austin, Texas. And this is from that exhibition. The plastic containers are designed to be useful for very specific and brief tasks. They were designed to keep fragile or temporary items protected, such as eggs, COVID tests, takeout food, and Girl Scout cookies. I'm interested in these objects as cultural artifacts of our present time. I'm also interested in the contradicting sense of time that these objects inherently possess as materials and in their functions. These ceramic objects are castings of the negative spaces of plastic packages. Through the physical connection of a cast, they become indexical signs or representations of those disposable objects. These cast porcelain pieces are glazed with traditional Korean celadon glaze to further the conversation with history, culture, time, and identity. In both the Tyvek pieces and the ceramic objects, I continue to contemplate the relationship between the matrix and the image that exists in the printmaking processes. The delivery boxes are used as templates to trace and cut Tyvek sheets, and the plastic container form acts as molds for slip casting. I think about the printed image and the printedness as an act of translation. An image is translated through the medium and the process of printmaking. Similarly, the use of the actual objects as template or a mold allows me to recreate them through translation. Through these translated images and forms, I hope to explore the notion of familiarity, materiality, ephemerality, and persistence. Some of these works are currently included in the exhibition at the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. The exhibition title is Found in Translation, Exploration by eight Contemporary Artists, and it'll be up until August 2023. I'll end the talk by showing you some images of my works in this exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoonmi. This is fabulous. I enjoy it so much. A few questions from me so that we can start the discussion. First of all, a very basic question. How did you start printmaking in the beginning? Is that because it's the foundation of all of your work? Or so what gets you interested in printmaking in the beginning? It is probably way back to when you were in Korea, right?
To be honest, I really didn't know anything about printmaking in Korea. And I don't know if it's similar in Hong Kong, but getting into college is very competitive in Korea.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to study art.
Right.
And I didn't know a whole lot of different kinds of art making. I think I just thought, painting is art. Right. So I thought I'd be a painter, and I was trying to go to Hongik University, which is the school that I wanted to get into. And in Korea, you do this exams to get into university. Right. You do the drawing exam and the painting exam. So before you apply, you train in high school. You go to this private institutions. So I was doing that, and I think the director of the institution advised me that if I want to get into university, if I want to get into Hongik University, it would be safer if you apply for a printmaking program than painting program. So that's honestly
easier somehow. Is that easier?
Maybe, it was probably less competitive than painting department. So that's why I applied to printmaking. Right. And that's the first time I encountered printmaking. Although, I'm sure I have done, in elementary school and middle school, I've done some printmaking in art classes. But I never really thought about it seriously. But so that's how I encountered printmaking, applying to printmaking department to get into the university. Right. But I was really lucky because when I started to learn printmaking, it was really interesting to me. I think now I realize I'm very process-oriented person. The way I kind of think conceptually, it really is important to me what kind of process and material that I choose. So I think instinctively, it just, worked for me. So I started to learn printmaking, and I continued. And then, I applied to graduate school. It was actually painting and printmaking program at RISD. So, my honest answer is that's the reason why I started printmaking.
So this is what you did in your BEFA, right? A very traditional kind of approach to printmaking, like doing woodblock, lithographies, and all the basic kinds of conventional printmaking techniques.
It's the printmaking department at Hongik University was very young at that time. I started in 93, and the program had just started in 1988. So I think they had just graduated their first BFA graduates in printmaking. So it's a very new department, and the professors that we had studied, well, at least the professors that I worked with, they studied either in America or Europe and came back and taught printmaking. So a lot of the, and there were some professors that studied in Japan. So most of the printmaking processes that I learned were all Western style printmaking processes. And that's what I learned. And, you know, we learned everything, you know, from relief, etching, lithography, you know, screen printing. I feel like I got a really good education in terms of techniques. We had experts in many different techniques. So yeah, that's when I learned a lot of different printmaking techniques.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to know a bit more about what's happening in Korea. Is printmaking popular among students, art students? Because in Hong Kong, printmaking is very rarely seen, whether it's in art or in galleries.
Yeah, you know, I am not sure because I haven't lived in Korea for so long.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
So traditionally, Korea is more like, I don't know, in China, it's more on mokuhanga woodblock.
I think that is being taught now at Hongik, the water-based woodblock printing.
Oh, right.
But when I was there, we didn't learn water-based.
Okay.
It was all oil-based.
I have a question about the education system, and I would like to know a bit more about that. Would you introduce the printmaking program in your school? Maybe not now because we are now focused on your work. Perhaps later on? I'm interested in how you reference history, like art history in your art pieces. For example, the 10 Bamboo Studio and also Celandon. To my understanding, Celandon is a glaze that was really popular in Korea for a period of time. Would you like to share a bit more about it with us?
Sure. Yeah, I have to say that I am not very knowledgeable because, first of all, ceramic isn't my medium that I learned, and so it's very new to me. So everything that I do, that I've been doing in ceramic is very new, and also it is very interesting to me because it is new. Not only it's new to make, I'm learning how to make ceramics as I'm making my work. It's also a way for me to kind of explore things that I hadn't really been paying attention to. And I think that's very similar in the way that I started to look at some of the old woodblock printed books from Asia. These are the things that I didn't really pay attention to when I was in Korea. And now that I'm not there, you know, now I'm interested and I'm looking at these books kind of from a distance. And I feel that is very similar, the way that I'm starting to explore Korean traditional celadon glaze. So I've only recently begun, but I really find it interesting how visually it looks kind of used in my ceramic works, where I'm kind of making a cast of these really contemporary disposable objects, and kind of on the surface I glaze it with Korean traditional celadon. So, you know, I don't have a whole lot to say about it right now because I am still kind of exploring what that means, and just, as I'm learning how to make ceramics. But I think it's something that I find really interesting for me personally, because it's a way for me to kind of explore my identity as a Korean person living in US. And just the way that how it looks, the appearance of how the celadon glaze looks on my ceramic, I love the way how it looks very familiar and very foreign. It's very familiar because I think a lot of people are, even if they're not very knowledgeable, they know celadon. They kind of recognize that as this traditional Asian glazing technique, but then it looks really foreign at the same time because it's glazed on these, I don't know, this takeout dinner containers. So those are the kind of things that I'm kind of exploring as I'm, making these new bodies of work.
Okay, will we move on to the next question? Yoonmi, you talk about Ikebana. Do you have knowledge of Ikebana before or after you make your prints? And how does this kind of idea come about in your work?
Yeah, so I was not familiar with Ikebana specifically, but I've just been wanting for a while to do something with flower.
So have you actually physically been flower arranging with,
Not before that. Before I started this project. I don't know why, but I just wanted to do something with flowers because I was familiar with Dutch flower paintings, and I was very much attracted to that, and also just the idea of, cut flower was really interesting to me because I'm interested in subject matter when they have this feeling of time being so fleeting, and I think cut flower arrangement has that kind of sensibility. So I've been thinking about it for a while, not really knowing how to make this into work because it just didn't seem interesting to me to just depict flowers. That wasn't enough for me, so it's just been sitting in the back of my mind for many years. And when I first did the residency in Japan, I just started to draw flower images, and also I got some books out from the library where I work at the University of Kansas, books, woodblock printed images of flowers. So I was just making some copies and doing some studies and sketching, just thinking about what I might be able to do. Because when I work, that's sometimes what I do. I just do some drawings, and that could take years, just drawing and thinking about it and doodling. And then when I was in Japan in 2012, when I did a residency at MiLab, and I didn't really know what work I was going to make. So I just started drawing flowers again. And I think maybe timing worked at that time for whatever reason. And maybe because I was in a different environment, you often recognize things or notice things. And I don't know if you've, in Japan, there's, I think, and maybe in Korea too, probably, there's so much packaging. I think especially in Japan. And so I just started to do drawings with the cut flowers with these disposable containers. And when I started doing these drawings, it made sense. That really made sense to me, to explore that idea of that contradicting sense of time, because the flowers, cut flowers, have that, and also disposable containers have that contradicting sense of time. So that's how the body of work started. And I just started making prints using combining those two subject matter. And as I was doing that work, I did take workshops to learn how to do ikebana arrangements. Not at the level where that's the main thing that I do, but just kind of to learn the logic and how it's done. So in Kansas City, there was Sogetsu ikebana master in Kansas City. So every Saturday for several months, I would go to her house and learn the basics of the ikebana arrangements.
And I'm sure there would be connections between you having read all these traditional mustard seed kind of prints, and I can see the connection visually between your work and all those things.
Yeah, and a lot of the way that I depict the flowers or even the disposable containers, I think visually I'm very much influenced by the images that I saw in those books. Not only because, not just the fact that they're, both woodblock printed images.
Yeah.
And I even do lithography. And after I started doing mokuhanga prints, my lithographs started to look like woodblock prints. And I started to use the methods that I would use in mokuhanga. I would apply that to my lithograph. So I've noticed a lot of the ways that I do lithograph is very similar to how I kind of organize the layers and how I ink up the layers in mokuhanga printing.
Yeah. I want to share with you an artist that I found quite intriguing after looking at your work. I'm going to share your screen now and see how you think about it. Okay, this is a Chinese painter, Chang Yu.
Oh, wow.
Can you see?
Yeah.
So these are...
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah. He spawned in the late 19th century and passed away, I think, in the 1970s. He went to Taiwan. I'm going to write that down. Yeah. So I find so much... after looking at your work, I feel intrigued by... because recently, there's an auction in Hong Kong, a Christie's auction in Hong Kong, featuring some of Chang Yu's print. And that looks very familiar to your print. So that's what drew me to...
Oh, yeah, that one. I love that one.
Things like this,
Yeah.
So I don't know, you're interested, you can go back and search for these kind of images from him. I don't know. But he's a painter. He's a very early kind of travel to Paris with a group of Chinese painter. And he's been, I love his kind of style, a very kind of flat kind of graphical arrangement, which is very similar to your approach. So that's why I want to show you these, Oh,
I love these. And did you say he moved to Taiwan?
In his latter days, I think. And he went back to Paris. I think I don't know if you know a photographer called Robert Frank, American photographer. He was befriended with Robert Frank and left with him, as far as I remember, something like 70 or 80 paintings. And Robert Frank went to Taiwan and sort of gave away or donated the whole set of 70 or 80 print paintings in Taiwan. So that's how the story goes. And I think these are lovely.
Oh, yeah.
So by all means, just to share with you these. So I find very, very much similar to your prints. And
and also the way that it's just like singular. There isn't anything else around it.
That's I find your similarity between yours approach and those in your prints. But that's I kind of.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. I'm glad to know
glad that you love it. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. I see you put a living floral plant with a disposable container. The kind of visual contrast between the liveliness and the stillness make me wonder if that is a visual parody or kind of visual comparison between your subject matters. Is that what you want to communicate, or is that an approach to connect with the audience somehow?
Yes, and I did briefly mention it in the presentation, but that is something that I started to explore because I was directly referencing traditional woodblock printed books for flowers. Most of my flower images are, monochromatic. It's just line and black and white.
Very dark as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't, I might have one or two with a little bit of color, but they're all just monochromatic, black or gray, or closer to black. And that's because I'm referencing woodblock printed books. So I wanted to kind of reference the fact that I'm looking at a reproduction of an image and referencing from those books and how that the way the object is depicted in traditional Asian brush painting versus the containers, I am actually drawing them by looking at them. So I'm looking at my collected disposable containers, like soda cup, for example. I have those. So I'm drawing it in front of me, and I'm drawing it in the style that I learned to be Western way of depicting objects in space. So, trying to create, adding colors and creating gradation, although it's very light gradation. So my goal is to try to depict it in a way that I understand it to be Western way of creating illusion of volume in space. So by putting those two together, so two completely different pictorial tradition, I wanted it to, I'm forcing it together in one picture, but then they're depicted in a completely different way, different way of depicting objects in space.
Because the plants are always very flat, and the containers are more kind of three-dimensional, coming out kind of spatial kind of feeling.
Yes, exactly.
And the flower is always more kind of, how do I say, more kind of curvy and more kind of energetic visual than the more static containers. Right. So there's a visual imbalance or visual kind of contradiction between the two.
And I also think about kind of how, how in some ways, like personally, how I exist in two different cultures. So I kind of think about how I am one way in one culture and another way another culture. I am the same person, but depending on the context or where I am, I'm perceived differently. So I kind of wanted to subtly kind of suggest that in my work too.
So is there any connotation on your critique on consumerism or, things like that? My work starts with something that's more daily, more personal, just something that's mundane, because often it just comes from my observation. But I am aware, and I do think that my work does speak about consumerism and also about environment, not because necessarily that's where I started,
I didn't necessarily start my work or make my work thinking about consumerism or the environment. But I think because I sort of reflect what's around us, it inevitably speaks about that. And I do appreciate when people see that in my work.
Yeah,
and
particularly disposable containers, and then later on when you do the laying set of all the carton paper containers, and I do feel, and I do appreciate your kind of take on to this kind of how do you say, this kind of fast food culture and all this very short-lived, short-life kind of things that we have been consuming day in and day out,
Yeah.
And should we now move on to talking about sketches? Your kitchen plays a very big part in your art.
Yeah.
Can you say something more on that?
I think, you see, I didn't have a studio for a very long time.
Okay.
So I make prints at my university print shop.
Okay.
And my studio was basically my house. So a lot of the things just happened in my house. And, in our house, we have our front door, but our back door is where we enter mostly. And that's where our kitchen table is.
Oh,
so,
right. So
I think
everything sort of begin to go
back,
throw everything onto that.
Yeah, okay. Everything happens at the kitchen table because it's my studio. It's where it's we like eat.
Your worktop, something like.
Yeah, and where we put things, and it's always just changing, and that's where everything happens. I do have a bigger studio now that's separate from my house. But at that time when I was doing that body of work, and I think it still does affect me, in general, I tend to just kind of start a body of work because I notice something, and then I just kind of make a note of it sometimes for many years. And sometimes if I notice something and I just don't know why I'm continuously drawn to it, then I might just start drawing it for a while and then just see what happens. And nothing might happen, but something might happen. So there is this kind of time period when I'm working, when I'm just noticing and observing and drawing from it. And that could take some years. And then usually that turns into a body of work. Not all the time. Sometimes it's nothing, ends up being nothing, but oftentimes it turns into. But it would
be a basis of your art somewhere, somehow, I believe, because everything you've done ends up becoming.
Yeah, it starts there.
Yeah. Maybe we can move on to your art on Tyvek. I think this is a very interesting material. I never thought of, and I've personally have never seen people doing art with it. I only know people make products and designs with it, like clothes and bags and backpacks. Would you like to tell us a bit more on your experimentation with the material Tyvek?
Yeah, so that body of work started during the pandemic, and I think it was sort of an accident in some ways, but a lot of the things happened by accident. But I guess it's a matter of continuing and making something out of it, because some accidents don't become anything. But this, I had some Tyvek sheets in my studio because I was using it.
What started you out with doing things on it? It's like,
yeah, in US, there are some artists that use Tyvek as a drawing surface.
Right.
So I've not a lot, but I've seen some people use Tyvek to make drawings on it, and also a lot of galleries are now starting to use Tyvek to wrap artwork because it's archival.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
because my impression of Tyvek is all creased up and all kind of fold, and you have all kind of texture on it. It's not a flat surface, and then it's soft, and then it all sort of crumble up and all sorts of,
Yes, yeah, and there's different kinds of Tyvek too. I've seen Tyvek that looks more like fabric. I've seen Tyvek that seem more like paper. And so I just had that material, and I have done some other things. I printed on it, and I've done other projects with it. And so it's a material that I have around in my studio. And during COVID lockdown, I was just, working in my studios, doing what I can in my studio. And I started to just paint it and see what happens. And oftentimes like I said earlier, oftentimes my work, I kind of work in a way that I try this thing and then try another thing. And one thing leads to another thing. So my work kind of evolves that way.
How does it behave? How does it behave? Does it behave like paper or just like...
It does. It does.
It take on the ink quite well. Or your paint.
It does. It's not absorbent necessarily like paper.
Yeah, that's my
but
impression.
It takes water-based or oil-based pigments. So it takes it, and it does sometimes get stained. So you can kind of brush it on and paint things on it. It is somewhat like a little bit, it's a little bit resistant sometimes if you have your greasy fingerprint on it. So it will resist a little bit. So it's not as absorbent like paper. But the thing that I like about Tyvek is you can cut it, you can paint on it, you can fold it like paper, but it's stronger. It doesn't tear. You can manipulate it, and it's kind of like fabric in that way. But so it feels very much like in between fabric and paper.
Have you tried print it on? Have you tried?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, on the press. How did it do on the press?
Fine. I printed lithograph on it, and it prints fine.
Okay, let's try it out sometime over here as well. Probably my last couple of questions. I see some of your effects on Sumi ink effects on Tyvek, which reminds me of a lot of Chinese ink masters effect, because they use sort of different sort of solvents and chemicals to achieve those effects, which are quite similar to what you've been showing us. So I think that was quite interesting. So if you are coming to Hong Kong, we can take you to some of those Chinese ink paintings, and then you can definitely share some of your techniques with people like those. And
that would be wonderful.
Because they've been painting with those effects in their painting already for quite a long time in some of the Chinese ink painting. So that's my take on to your work.
Yeah, and I've actually been practicing because I've never learned how to do Sumi ink painting in Korea. I've learned all Western painting. Yeah. So that's something that after I got exposed to the Mustard Seed Garden Manual of Painting and those books, I sort of taught myself. I just kind of copy the book and just try to teach myself how to do brush painting. So it'd be really wonderful to meet people that are actually masters of those processes.
Okay, I think we have done with most of my questions. Not sure if you would like to talk about anything with us anymore. Or maybe you can talk about your teaching at your university, or how do you do your teaching over there in Kansas? Like a sort of very brief introduction to your studios and things like that.
Sure. So I've been teaching at the University of Kansas now for 21 years, I think.
That long? Really?
Yes. Yeah. I started in 2001.
So it's the first uni that invited you over to teach in the States after?
No, I taught it after I graduated. I taught at Washington University in St. Louis for 1 year.
Okay.
And then I applied for my current job they were looking for a lithographer, and I was doing lithography, so I applied and I got this job. So I've been teaching there since 2001, and I teach primarily lithography. And after I did my first Mukuhanga residency in 2004, I think in 2005 or 6, I started to teach Mukuhanga at the university. So I've been teaching it every year since then. So those are the two printmaking processes that I teach primarily. But we have oil-based relief, we have intaglio, we have screen printing, lithography, we have all of the processes, including, photo methods and digital printing. So printmaking is an area in the art department, visual art department at the university. It's a little bit different from, I think, the university that I went to in undergrad, where, if you're a printmaking major, you just do printmaking. At University of Kansas, our program is quite interdisciplinary. So students, their degree is BFA in visual art. Okay. And they can choose to focus in printmaking if they want to, but they are actually encouraged to just explore a lot of different mediums.
Right.
And, and they're actually required to take at least 5 different areas in the beginning, right, minimum. Right. And we have painting, drawing, sculpture, printmaking, expanded media, metalsmithing and jewelry, textiles and ceramic, and we also have visual art education.
Right.
So it's all fine arts. We have a separate department that's design department, and they have graphic design, illustration, industrial design, and so on. But our program is all fine arts program. And we have students, undergraduate students, and we also have graduate students. Our graduate program is 3 years, and the graduate program is also very interdisciplinary. So students enter the program with their portfolio in printmaking, and they apply for printmaking. And the printmaking faculty reviews the portfolio and application. But once they're accepted, they can work with anybody in the department. So
3 years is quite long for graduate program, isn't it?
Usually? It's not unusual in US. A lot of the state schools are 3 years. I personally went to the program that I went to was 2 years. So
and it's full time. And it's full time.
Yes, it's full time. The other thing that might be a little bit different is that for during the 3 years, at least minimum 2 years, the graduate students also teach. So they also teach their own classes.
So they are also acting as teaching TAs, teaching.
Yes.
Students.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in Hong Kong these days, most taught programs, master programs, are 12 months, 1 full year. So they, at the end of the program, they have to submit the thesis or dissertation apart from the portfolio, right?
They have a thesis exhibition, and then they have a written thesis that they have to write.
Right.
So the first year, after their first year, they have a review, and then if they pass, they can move on to their second year, and then they have the review, and if they pass, they can go into their thesis year, which is their third year. So the third year is their thesis year.
Right. Okay. So they have different exit points in case they don't pass.
Yeah, I mean, that's rare for us to kick them out, but
yeah, I mean, because in UK, the master programs, if you don't pass some of the final, if you can run in the final semester, things like that, you are just awarded of a postgrad diploma instead of a master. That's how things work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some schools in US where you, it's 3-year program, and then after their first year, I can't remember if it's first year or second year, they get their master's in art degree, and then they finish again with their Master of Fine Arts degree.
Okay.
But where I teach, we just have Master of Fine Arts, and they complete their 3 years.
Okay. So I guess, thank you very much. I guess that probably concludes our talk or plus your presentation. Thank you so much, Yoonmi. And we would like to thank the Cultural, Sports and Tourism Bureau for supporting us in this project, which is named Beyond Paper. And this is part of a series of talks that we have invited printmasters to participate in the sharing. And that's it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.